At this point in the One Piece story, the future of the world rests on Luffy's shoulders, with him unlocking Gear 5 and channeling the power of the sun god Nika. But what if Luffy wasn't the reincarnation of Joy Boy? In today's video, we'll explore what would happen if Luffy didn't eat the Gomu Gomu no Mi at the beginning of One Piece, instead embarking on his journey with nothing but raw determination and his inherited will. Picture this: young Luffy still dreams of being Pirate King, still gets inspired by Shanks, but that fateful day when he accidentally ate the devil fruit never happens. Right off the bat, recruiting his crew becomes exponentially harder. Maybe he still saves Zoro since that's more courage than power, but life gets really difficult from that point on. Captain Kuro would likely kill Luffy because the Straw Hat Captain would have no way to restrain him once Zoro headed off with Usopp. Without his powers, there's no plot armor at play, just a young, inexperienced fighter against a seasoned killer. Don Krieg becomes an insurmountable wall without Luffy's devil fruit powers, and Sanji never ends up joining the Straw Hats. By this point, we're looking at a completely different crew dynamic. But let's say somehow Luffy overcomes all odds and makes it to the Grand Line. What's he going to do against the likes of Crocodile? The former warlord soundly beat Luffy twice before he figured out how to bypass Crocodile's defense. But without the Gomu Gomu no Mi, that blood-soaked punch that saved Alabasta never happens. Luffy and his crew die in the tombs. Crocodile takes over Alabasta and the rebellion fails, and the story ends in the desert. Now, we could go on and on about how things get even worse in Skypiea, Water 7, Enies Lobby, but I think you get the point. Something has to change for Luffy to survive his early encounters. And we actually have the solution right in Luffy's childhood, as he's the grandson of probably the most powerful fighter without a devil fruit in the entire franchise. Monkey D. Garp is a prolific user of armament, observation, and conqueror's haki, but is also a fantastic teacher, as we saw when he took on the Marine Academy during his semi-retirement. Knowing his grandson would sail into the open seas with nothing to defend himself, Garp would likely give Luffy intense haki training from childhood in this timeline. So how does this training play out? We already know from Luffy's training with Rayleigh that he's a prodigy in all three haki types, so there's no issue there. Through examples like Kobe, we also know that Garp's training can take a regular boy and turn him into an absolute monster, capable of caving in decommissioned ships with his bare fists. This suggests that a fruitless Luffy who trained under Garp would probably be on par with current Kobe, but with the addition of knowing some form of Conqueror's haki as well. This version of events basically guarantees Luffy's progress through the Grand Line, but each victory would be earned through superior strategy, crew coordination, and gradually awakening haki abilities. The East Blue Saga changes radically, because now Luffy is actually ridiculously overpowered compared to some of the key antagonists he faced. Rescuing Zoro from Captain Morgan would be a piece of cake, and the fight against Helmeppo's men would be just straight up demolition. Defeating Captain Kuro would also be straightforward, with Luffy's advanced armament haki fending off Kuro's sharp claws, providing enough openings for Luffy to break through with a punch. Luffy enjoys equally easy battles against Arlong and Don Krieg as well, and Nami and Sanji are inspired to join the crew just like in the original timeline. One interesting observation is that Luffy's haki mastery at this stage could potentially help his crewmates as well, since he would be able to share some knowledge with the likes of Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp. However, given that Luffy would probably be a terrible teacher, it's unlikely that this will make much of a difference in the crew's abilities. The most serious challenge that Luffy might face early on in the story is Enel with his devil fruit powers. Initially, this matchup was pretty easy for Luffy, as the Gomu Gomu no Mi was basically a hard counter to Enel, because it made Luffy immune to all lightning attacks. But without this immunity, the Straw Hat crew might just get completely fried at Skypiea. For the sake of our story, let's assume the plot continues as usual, with the pirate crew making their way through the CP9 saga and rescuing Robin as well. Unlike Enel, characters like Blueno and Rob Lucci can still be defeated using pure haki mastery, so we can continue pushing forward all the way to the Summit War saga. The critical point is here at the Marineford War. Will Luffy be able to save Ace in this timeline? Despite having some haki mastery, there's no way Luffy gets strong enough to take on Akainu by this point, meaning that he will still have to witness Ace being killed. Following this, the Straw Hat crew split ways for their training during the time skip and reunite at Fishman Island 2 years later. But here's where our story truly diverges, and it all centers on one moment: Dressrosa. Luffy arrives at Dressrosa as a pure haki user and sees Ace's devil fruit, the Mera Mera no Mi, offered as a prize in the Colosseum. Now, there are two ways the story can progress from this point. In one version of events, Luffy eats the Mera Mera no Mi in Ace's honor, gaining his brother's fire-wielding abilities and adopting a completely different fighting style. The other option is for the story to proceed more similarly to the main timeline, with Sabo eating the flame fruit and Luffy fully leaning into haki mastery, surpassing even the likes of Rayleigh and Shanks by the final saga. First, let's explore the fire path, because a Mera Mera no Mi Luffy completely changes the power scaling of One Piece. Luffy probably matches up the same against the Big Mom pirates in this version of events, as there's no character here that really tests the limits of his devil fruit powers. But things get interesting during the encounter with Kaido, as the Maramena no Mi doesn't have the same unpredictability that Rubber brought to Luffy's fights. A flame-based Luffy versus Kaido becomes a battle of raw power and destruction, rather than the theme of liberation we got with Gear 5. This raises the question, could Luffy with the Maramena no Mi actually win against Kaido? Without Gear 5 and the awakening of Nika, it's highly likely that Kaido remains undefeated. But considering Luffy's increased Haki mastery, he might survive long enough for the Alliance to win through different means. But now we have the second timeline where Luffy fights as a pure Haki master. This is objectively worse than the timeline we explored earlier, because now he doesn't have a devil fruit power either. Even if Luffy can overpower the likes of Doflamingo and Katakuri, he once again runs into the Kaido problem. But here's the ultimate question that the hardcore fans have probably been asking since the moment you clicked on this video. What about Nika? At this point in the story, we know that the Gomu Gomu no Mi was a fake name put in place by the world government, and Luffy's devil fruit is actually the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika. The thing about this fruit is that it seemingly chooses its user, with some theories suggesting that the fruit actually rejected Shanks and was meant specifically for Luffy. This opens up a whole new world of possibilities for us. The first is that the Nika fruit probably would have found Luffy anyway. Think about it, we already know through his lineage that Luffy is destined to be a warrior of liberation, so it might just be possible that he wasn't just one potential candidate, but the destined user of the Gomu Gomu no Mi. This means that Luffy would encounter his devil fruit at some point after getting through the Grand Line, and together with his Haki mastery built from childhood, he'd be ridiculously more powerful. But this version of events doesn't make for a great theory since nothing much actually changes. The only real setback Luffy faced was at Marineford, but it's difficult to think even advanced Haki would help him stop a Kainu. This raises another problem. If the Gomu Gomu no Mi isn't eaten by Luffy, who inherits the will of Nika in his place? Perhaps we could see a different character of Luffy's generation, like Sabo or Kobe eating the devil fruit instead, but this calls Luffy's purpose in the One Piece universe into question. If another character carries forward the legacy of Joy Boy, will Luffy still be the captain who spearheads the mission to take down the world government? Chances are Luffy would still fight for liberation, but his goals might be more similar to someone like Whitebeard instead. So while Luffy would still become an Emperor of the Seas, his role in the story would be far less prominent, with him becoming a key supporting character in the hero's journey instead. But that's no way to treat our main character. So the final part of our theory is whether Luffy can still become the beacon of liberation through sheer willpower, even without his devil fruit. Think about it. The main reason supporters rally around Luffy is his passion, personality, and love for his crew. None of that depends on his devil fruit. As a result, in this storyline, Luffy's pathway to becoming the Pirate King would focus more on building the most powerful crew, instead of becoming the most powerful pirate himself. This actually isn't too far from what Goldie Roger achieved together with his crew when he became Pirate King, so it perfectly fits the narrative of Luffy's journey as well. So what do you think about these theories? Would Luffy still find the One Piece without his devil fruit powers? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below.